Hello, everyone out there in internet land, illumination, and beyond. We're excited to have you all here. We're excited to have a very special guest. This is the first in the Online Therapy from Research to Practice webinar series, and we welcome Sue Grogan-Johnson. Such a great opportunity to have her come join us. There's so much to learn here. Before we move on, I just wanted to review our agenda for this webinar today. Can we see the next slide, Sue? We're just going to take a few minutes to introduce our presenter, tell you a little bit about this webinar, 5 minutes or so, and then Sue's going to launch into her presentation. And at the end, we're going to have a question and answer session. So we would encourage each of you, as you have questions as they come up, please put them in the chat so we can address those systematically one by one when we get into the question and answer session. So without any further ado, let's talk a little bit about the presenter. I'm really excited about Susan. In my mind, she is one of the pioneers in telepractice, has been doing research as long as virtually anyone in this field, and has really helped telepractice move forward as a science, and more importantly, has helped us develop best practices for this so that we can ultimately help the students. Sue Grogan-Johnson is not just a doctor and professor, she's also a speech path. She teaches at Kent State University, where she specifically focuses in on adult and pediatric language disorders and directs the school-based speech-language telepractice project, which began in 2007. She has published research related to effectiveness of speech-language therapy services delivered to school-age children through telepractice, and presents on topics related to telepractice and language intervention for school-age students. One of the things, for those of you who are familiar with outcome research and all of this research, you will see Sue's name cited in virtually any study. I've done a little bit of research on the side on this, and she is cited all over the place. To my count, she has 235 plus citations in all sorts of different studies. So without any further ado, let's turn the time over to Susan. Thank you so much. And please remember to put your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll come back to those. So thank you, Susan. Good luck.
Good. Thank you, George. So I was just realizing as you were talking, that picture on the screen is like from 15 years ago. It was the picture you had to take when you started teaching. And so, yeah, my hair is a little grayer. So welcome, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us. And we are going to talk about evidence-based as kind of the start of this series. And as we go along, I'll sort of tell you how the series came to happen and some of the fun stuff we're doing. So before I launch into, kind of looking at some of the evidence, I thought it might be helpful for those of you who are joining to understand our project and kind of where we're coming from, because the pandemic in particular has changed people's perception of telepractice, and our profession is wrestling with it in some regards. So I just thought it would give you a frame of reference of where I'm coming from to sort of give just the briefest of backgrounds. So what you see on the screen is a picture from one of our first telepractice clients. It was a second grader. In 2007, Ohio Department of Education gave us a grant, and the purpose of the grant was to see if we could even get a school-based telehealth project up and going. And if we did, were children able to make similar amounts of progress through telehealth as they were in person? So that was the initial kind of mission from Ohio Department of Ed. And our earliest work was with 2 rural school districts here in Ohio that were about 300 miles from the university. We kind of experienced every problem you could experience, and we faced every challenge you could possibly face. Our second grader gives you a glimpse at some of our beginning equipment. The orientation's off, but you see our client with her headset and microphone. And at the time, we were using Logitech cameras that would rotate on a pole. Things have changed since then. Currently, our project provides services to about 100 students each school year. And we work primarily in 2 school districts. In our one district, we provide the services through Telepractice to the school-age students. And then there's an on-site SLP that provides services to pre-K. And in our other district, we provide services across the grade levels, pre-K through post-high school. And there are 2 speech pathologists who are on site in that district. And then we are the 3rd full-time person. So our equipment, just so you understand how we operate, is we use desktop computers. We use the Zoom platform. We use between 1 and 2 22-inch monitors. We have separate web cameras, and we also have separate additional microphones. And then on the student side, we are using desktop computers with either a touchscreen, a wall-mounted monitor, and or a desktop monitor. Those are at least 22 inches. Some of our students wear headsets during the session, not all of them. And at both locations, we have an e-helper that sort of escorts the students to and from, helps with troubleshooting, may gather materials for us. But oftentimes they're doing other school work once the sessions get up and started. We occasionally have internet or technology challenges, but I have to be honest with you, in the steady state, we have a robust internet connection. We operate out of the university, and we operate 2 educational settings. So we appreciate having good, reliable internet. Our audio and video are generally very good, and we have IT support sort of at our command if we need it. So I understand that for many of you, that is not the same experience. But our commitment was to providing services that were equivalent to in-person as much as we possibly could. So we really try to operate it at the top levels when we can. So the services we provide, our commitment was really to, we want to be like an in-person SLP for the districts. We want to act as an employee of the district, even though we are 300 miles away from them. So we provide the full range of services. We are primarily pull out, although we do push into the classroom for sessions and for some RTI. And as I mentioned before, we're pretty much seeing students pre-K through post-12th, a variety of communication impairments. And then we have additional diagnoses: specific learning disability, autism, visual and hearing impairments, intellectual impairment, autism. We have a dedicated classroom for students with emotional and behavioral disorders, and those students join us for services as well. So I think it looks and feels similar to what many in-person placements would be like. Let me just, COVID changes the discussion on telehealth, right? Because of so many challenges and what happened to so many school-based speech pathologists during this time. So for us, I think it was March. So, but during the spring, I can't remember for sure the date of the 2019-2020 school year, our districts went completely remote and our university required us to work from home. So we transitioned to remote service delivery, all of us from our homes. We did not have the same robust internet connection, and we obviously didn't have the same audio and video quality, and we really were in pandemic mode. We do what we can do to provide some services. And then last school year, one of our districts required families to make a decision before the school year started if they would be in person or remote. And our other district did not. They allowed parents to continuously change their mind. So as you might expect, we had every possible alternative that occurred with those different decisions from our district. So we had very similar experiences to what you read on the social media SLP pages. We did have significant technology issues when we were trying to telepractice into students' homes. We had distracting environments. We had distracted students. We had families not showing up for sessions. So in that regard, we shared many of the experiences that those of you who transitioned to telehealth experience. The thing that we didn't experience, but we heard about from many of our colleagues, is that we did not experience that extreme fatigue and kind of the emotional strain that many of the SLPs talked about as they had to transition to telehealth. And I think it's just because that's how we live our daily life. The transition was different for us. And regardless of that and of the challenges that we all have experienced, we're still fans of telepractice. We do still think it is a good service delivery model, and it's one of the tools that needs to be in the SLP's toolkit as an option for providing services. So today what we're going to do is just look at some of the research. Where are we currently in our understanding of the effectiveness of telehealth? And there are a number of small pilot studies that looked at the use of telehealth for a particular disorder. Fluency, stuttering is widely published with small studies related to effectiveness and everything in between. Working with students on the autism spectrum, there are a number of studies related to that. So rather than go through all of those, I kind of condensed our time to talk about some of the broader or larger studies related to school-based intervention and telehealth. And most of those have come out of the research that we've done here at Kent. But recently there's been some nice replication studies and extension studies that I think you'll be encouraged by. So just going quickly because we've got lots to cover. And I always plan too much for these sessions. But when we first started year one, we were following the mandate from the Ohio Department of Ed. And our job was to compare in-person and remote delivery of speech and language services. And we measured it in the same way that the districts that we were in would measure progress. So we administered standardized tests, we compared progress reports, and we used the ASHA school-based NOMS comparison. And I'll talk with you about that in just a minute. And then we also did a satisfaction survey. We wanted to know what kids and parents and teachers felt about the program. We made significant revisions after year one, as you might expect. And then in year two, we tried to narrow down our focus. Year one had been children with speech, sound disorders, and or language impairment. Year two, we just focused on speech sound intervention. And we compared a complete in-service delivery model for a semester with a complete remote service delivery, different students in those two conditions. And both groups of students made progress. They did well, but with a very small n, our students in telepractice made significantly more improvement. So we exercise a great deal of caution in interpreting that. It was an unbelievably small group of students, and the students in the telehealth condition were seen individually as compared to groups of 2 in the in-person. So it wasn't a perfect study, but it started moving us down the line of becoming more sophisticated. Year 3 was an interesting year for us. We compared students with a national database, the ASHA School Age NOMS database, which had thousands of students compared to our 76 students, but it allowed us to look at a larger number of subjects and data to see, are we seeing similar progress? And since our study, we've had 2 sets of researchers extend and duplicate that result, which I think you'll recognize as good science. And they're getting very similar results to us, which is always fun. And then we did a randomized controlled trial, which I'm sure you know is kind of what we all hope for when we do a research study. We control as many factors as we can, and we provide as pure an opportunity to show change or measure change in a randomized controlled trial. So all of our other studies were done in the schools during the school year with the usual huge range of factors. It's functional research, it's action research, but it's hard to generalize from that research. So the summer project, the controlled trial, was our attempt to kind of become more scientific and really have something that people could sort of hang their hats on. So I'm going to show you a little bit about some of those studies, and then I want to get to some of the new stuff that people are doing. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through this, but we can certainly cycle back and answer questions at the end. So in our very first study, the school districts were extremely nervous about starting telehealth service delivery. And they were very concerned that if the students were in telehealth for an entire school year, that they might not meet their IEP goals. And they were very cautious about how we could possibly study with the students that they had selected for us. So we decided to do a kind of a split half study. So half of the year, the students received their services in person, and the other half of the year, they received them through telehealth. We ended up having to offer Walmart gift cards to help people participate because there really was a great deal of concern about switching to the service delivery model. So we measured the students' change in performance with their quarterly progress reports. We compared them to the ASHA NOMS system, which I'll show you on the next slide. And in that district, where the districts where we were working, they re-administered the Goldman-Fristow test of articulation to their students with speech sound disorders. That was one of their measures of progress. So we did that as well. The students participated and we mixed it up. We varied the 2 conditions. So there were always children in the telepractice condition and always children in the side-by-side or the in-person condition. So what we found at the end of the school year, and the results I'm showing you first are from the ASHA NOMS comparison. So the NOMS program is the National Outcomes Measurement System. And I'm sure that many of you have at least heard of this system. ASHA currently has the school age NOMS system is not active. They are revising it, and I believe they intend to reactivate it. But they permitted us to use the data they had collected over years on how students in the public schools respond to treatment. And so we selected the functional communication measures from NOMS for the types of children we had in our research project. And we just compared, how did our students compare to the thousands of students, the data in the National NOMS report. And for those of you who aren't familiar with NOMS, in the NOMS program, when a student starts on their IEP, they are assigned a rating on a communication measure. If they have an impairment in speech intelligibility, the speech pathologist rates them on their intelligibility. And then at the end of the school year, they rate them again. And there's a training process so that speech pathologists rate consistently with the norming group. And so we use that same measure to compare our students who had speech sound disorders. And we looked at 3 levels. We looked at students who made no progress during the school year. We looked at students who had improved 1 level on the functional level. And we looked at students who improved multiple levels. And as you can see, when we compared the in-person delivery to the telepractice delivery, we had more students who made no progress, and we had more students who made multiple levels of progress. And we had fewer students who made just 1 level of progress. So a little bit curious, but we also only had 8 students. So then we looked at another measure, and this measure was speech sound production. And you'll see that once again, telepractice outperformed in person for the number of students who made no progress and the number of students who improved multiple levels. But students who improved just 1 level, the in-person delivery model had a higher percentage of students. Okay, so just another measure, I'm going to sort of pass over this to kind of get to our other information. But for spoken language production, we compared 7 of our students with the NOMS reports. And you'll see the interesting number there is the number of students in telehealth who improved multiple levels compared to the in-person, and a lower number of students who made no progress. So, all right, Goldman-Fristow test results. We kind of kept those classifications, and you'll see that for both in-person and telepractice subjects, we had a student in each group that their score didn't change. And then for students whose standard score improved, we see a similar number, and students whose standard score decreased, it's a little bit lower in the telepractice group. Okay, so overall, those results to us were encouraging, especially with the split half and with the all the challenges of getting started. But I thought you might be interested in reading what some of the parents wrote to us at the end of the school year. So I'll just let you look at those. I don't feel like I need to read those. So the students and parents were very enthusiastic about the project. The educators, not so much. And we have found over the years in our research that it takes several years before you truly get buy-in from multiples of people, educators and administrators, that they truly come to accept the change. So we did survey the teachers, and only about half of them returned their surveys. And in general, the themes that came out is that they didn't really understand the components of the program. We had one teacher who felt that the district had moved to telehealth because they were trying to save money, and it was obviously an inferior program. But at the same time, she checked the boxes that said she didn't know the components of the program. She didn't know how the students were responding. And even though we did training and we tried to reach out and collaborate, still at the end of the year, we felt like there was a great deal that was not known about the project. So the only exception in the satisfaction surveys from the teachers is that the students reported to them how much they liked it. And so a number of those surveys, they reported that the students had told them that they liked receiving their speech services on the computer, was how they told them, and they recognized that. The other thing we wanted to collect data on, because people were very concerned that, and I think there's still a little bit of this now, people were very concerned that technology would be very inconsistent and that students would miss sessions because technology was the cause. So we just collected data on the telehealth sessions during the school year. I don't think districts collect data on the percentage of sessions that are missed or kept during a school year, but it'd be interesting to compare. So you'll see that 79% of all possible therapy sessions were held during that school year. But then we broke down, why did students miss their sessions? And you'll see that it's pretty similar to what you would expect in the in-person situation. 38% of all missed sessions was due to bad weather days. We had 15% student absences, 20% where the teachers were in in-service sessions, and so school didn't happen that day. 13% were when there were school-related activities, assemblies, or field trips. 4% of our missed sessions were because of site-based technical difficulties. Thankfully, Kent didn't cause any of the technical difficulties during that first year. And we had some absences when our speech pathologists were ill. But an interesting result, and provided data to us about what you can expect about consistency of telehealth. All right. So I am going to skip over this result. This was the little study where we had students in person or telehealth receiving speech sound intervention. The thing that made this study unique is that for both in person and through telehealth, all of the students' activities were computer-based intervention materials. So if the students were in person, they sat together at a table with the SLP and worked on materials on the computer. And if they were online, everything was online as well. It was a small study, and it just was helping us move forward in our understanding of the disorder. And students in both conditions made improvement. And, you know, really that's what we're hoping for, right? We don't expect telehealth to be better, but we don't want it to be worse. We want there to be a comparable result. It's sort of interesting in research that you're just trying to see no difference rather than a clear difference. So this is kind of the fun part of research and where we are now. So when researchers are able to do a systematic review or a meta-analysis of current research, that's when we can start to develop, or we can start to see patterns and start to make some conclusions about what we think about this service delivery model. So we have two nice systematic reviews. Rudolph and Rudolph in 2015 found 6 articles that were scientifically rigorous enough that they could conduct a review, and the articles from our research were included in that. And what they concluded based on their results is that telehealth is a promising service delivery model. Everything to date suggests that it is an adequate service delivery model, but they felt that additional data, and in particular, larger studies with more subjects, would be needed to confirm equivalent outcomes. Okay, so everybody wants that for every service delivery model, right? We don't have large sample size service delivery model studies for pull-out therapy. We don't have it for in the classroom therapy. Most of our service delivery models do not have the strong evidence base that we would hope for. So it's kind of exciting for us in the telehealth world that we're amassing that information, that we're getting to there, right? So Wales did a follow-up review in 2017, Wales and colleagues, and they were able to select 7 articles that met a sufficient scientific rigor. They weren't single subject studies, or they didn't have significant scientific flaws. And their conclusion was that participants made significant and similar amounts of improvement in both conditions, which is a pretty strong statement. And again, there was a call for, can you provide some more information? Can you get a larger study with lots of subjects? How can we really compare this across a broader domain? So just recently, we've had 2 studies that extended those ASH and NOM studies that we did earlier. And it's wonderful to see a replication of a research project and a replication with a large number of students. So in the first comparison study that you see from 2018, the researchers looked at school-age students with speech sound disorders. It was limited to that. And they used the ASH and NOMS database, and they identified 1,331 students who received services in person. And they had data on how they changed on their functional measures of speech sound production. And they compared that with 428 students who received speech sound disorder therapy in a remote setting. So that's a nice increase in numbers. And what they found is that there was no significant difference between the 2 groups using the ASH and NOMS scoring system. And the benefit of the ASH and NOMS scoring system is that it assesses functional change. Does the child become a more productive, a more successful communicator? So that was a good replication and a nice confirmation. But the researchers continued their study, and in 2021, this time they expanded and they studied students who were identified with a receptive language or an expressive language impairment. And for the expressive component, they compared 1,214 students who received expressive language therapy in person with 408 students who received it remotely. And then they separated and compared the receptive language students, 946 in-person students to 254 remote students. And their conclusion, based on, again, comparing Ash and Nam's results, is that services delivered by telepractice can and do affect meaningful change for students with communication disorders. Now, understandably, we're talking about service delivery where there is adequate audio and video, where the remote services are similar to how services would be provided in person. So these research projects were not pandemic research projects. And the results, the things that are happening in the pandemic, I think we want to characterize them as the productive efforts of the work that was done to keep things going during an emergency, to keep whatever we could available for students during a challenging pandemic time. In the steady state, the way we view telehealth and how we would implement telehealth is going to be following that ASHA standard of it needs to be equivalent. Okay, so before we get to questions and answers, and I might have gone a little too quickly through that, and I apologize for that. I thought it might be helpful to stop and think about how do we utilize telehealth? Telehealth isn't going to replace in-person services, and it was never intended to. But how can we as a profession think about the service delivery model? How do we use it to our advantage, so to speak? So I just put a couple things up there for us to think about. One of the ways that we really like using the telehealth service delivery model is as a hybrid option. So in the school districts where we are working, there are in-person speech pathologists and there are our telehealth speech pathologists. And one of the districts, it's divided purely by grade level, preschool versus school age is the primary division for who gets services in one way or another. But in the other district, they are creative and flexible with the use of telehealth. So we move students in and out of telehealth versus in person, depending on where they are in their therapy process, depending on unique characteristics of the students that make them a better candidate for one of the other models. It could be a really great way to sort of, I don't want to say expand your services, but to better control or more efficiently use your services. For example, what if you use telehealth to be the second speech sound practice session of the week? Or what if you developed your RTI programs for children who aren't identified yet through the telehealth program? You could select students or groups of students or programs and utilize it that way. It might be interesting to pick telehealth for a select disorder. What if you had children with fluency disorder or children with hearing impairment that could connect with students in other school districts? That makes for an amazing therapy opportunity that otherwise they wouldn't experience. Maybe you would consider grade level. We've had good success with telehealth across all ages, but the older students sometimes will get a better buy-in because they're more willing to come when they're working on the computer and are away from colleagues, and that looks more, quotes, normal than some of the in-person opportunities. And Vicki Poulins and her team did an interesting little project, and I'll skip ahead to that and then I'll come back to this slide. Oh, okay, so I left that slide out. I'm just going to tell you about it. I'm losing my mind. I apologize for that. So in the Poland study, they created a quick articulation with high intensity program. And they actually used the published program called 5-Minute Kids, which maybe some of you have heard of. But the gist of that program is that rather than seeing children in a small group twice a week for 30 minutes or 20 minutes, instead you pull out children into the hallway or into a central location 3 to 5 times a week. And for 5 minutes, you do a very rapid drill session. So the key to the 5-Minute Kids program is that it is short, consistent sessions, and you have to get between 50 to 100 productions during that period of time. So in the Poland study, they implemented 5-Minute Kids, but it was actually 6-Minute Kids because they did 6-minute sessions with the students 3 times a week. And the children selected for it were children who had speech sound disorders, and they were primarily motoric. We're not going to put students into 5-Minute Kids who have childhood apraxia of speech or children with significant phonological impairment, all right? So the 5-Minute Kids works for kind of those classic motoric artic kids. And they compared their results with the children who received the kind of classic traditional twice a week for 20 to 30 minutes in a small group. What they found at the end of their time is that the students made progress in both groups. Both conditions resulted in the children improving their speech sounds. But what Poulens noted was kind of a high face validity and a greater satisfaction from the school districts where they worked. The teachers loved that the students were coming out of the class for these short 6-minute sessions. They felt like the students did not have as much disruption to their instruction, and they were very pleased with that. The administrators were pleased because they saw the children making progress. They noticed the children improving in their speech sound production, and they loved the efficiency of these short, quick sessions. The SLPs loved it because in the districts where they were working, because of how it was set up, their speech pathologists would be in one building once a week, and then they would go to another building for another week. So if the child was absent on the day that the SLP was there, it was like, sorry, you're out of luck. You don't get your session. And with these 5-Minute Kids sessions, 3 to 5 times a week, the students missed less therapy. They had the opportunity for consistent practice throughout the school year. So it was an interesting result. Some of the research on this, high intensity, quick articulation, the jury's still out on whether it's better than kind of our traditional methods of 2 to 3 times a week in small group settings. But I think what has come out of that is that the number of productions matters. So regardless of the therapy mode, telepractice can allow you to get those 50 to 100 productions. And that can be done a number of ways. So one of the reasons we developed this series of telehealth practices is I've been working with the journal Topics and Language Disorders, and they wanted to have a special edition on telepractice. I think most of the journals are feeling the need to do that with the pandemic. And we invited a number of the authors that you're going to get to hear from later in this series, but we invited them to contribute to the journal. And the thing that is really exciting for me, and I hope it is for you as well, is that as a profession, we are turning the corner in telepractice service delivery. We have an article submission where the researchers developed a tool specifically for telehealth to measure change in young children, toddlers, language development. And they are finding amazing results with working with the children, with their parents in their homes. They are actually asserting that this telehealth model may be the better way to look at this one measure of language performance. So it's not just we have to prove that it's okay to use telehealth. Now folks are saying this is an effective methodology, but now they're asking the question, if we're working with children in their homes, if we're working with children with their caregivers and parents, is that better than the less contextualized setting that we have traditionally put children into? You know, we've always assumed that in person was the gold standard because that's what we've always done. But technology is now allowing us to consider other options. So I think the exciting thing for us is that we're going to see these creative SLPs and researchers kind of push us to provide even better services. And maybe we're going to get to be a little more effective and efficient. Things that we've always known children do best in environments they're familiar with. We want to see children communicating with typical communication partners. Maybe some of this is going to allow us to exploit that and do better work as speech pathologists. So pretty exciting. And I hope that many of you will have a chance to read some of the articles. We expect it to come out in February of 2022. So that's the hope. So let's just scoot forward. George, I'm thinking we're okay to go to questions and answers.
Yes, by all means. But first and foremost, I thought that was a really great presentation. So thank you for just sharing a wealth of information. But yes, we do have a bunch of questions here.
Good.
So let's go ahead and just dive into those. Let's start with Wendy Jorgensen. Earlier in the presentation, she asked, how do you push in virtually?
Oh, okay. So there's a couple ways to do that. The way that we have been doing it is that we come into the classroom and we're projected onto the whiteboard in the class. So the students stay in their seats and we ask the classroom teacher to stay in the classroom. And then she facilitates, co-teaches with us, and we're just large and in charge on the whiteboard. So the thing we really want to do, this is our fun thing we want to do, is we really want to try a telepresence robot. We really want to try actually moving into the classroom as a technology body. So that's where we're headed next. We'll see how that works.
I am going to be curious to follow up with you in a couple of years to see how that unfolds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, we actually have several more questions here. The next question is, how do you explain the discrepancy of outcomes in your initial studies? It seems that students either didn't respond as well to telepractice or they responded better, i.e. no progress or one level versus multiple levels.
Yeah. So yeah, that's an interesting concept. And what I didn't share with you is the other data that kind of all gathered together to help us make a decision. So I didn't show you the progress report data. I showed you some of the test result data. So I think the easiest explanation is that we had too few children. It was probably an anomaly of, not having a large group of students to really show difference. But when we collected the data from multiple sources, we didn't have the same divergence. The progress reporting, the test results in combination with the NOMs, we looked more similar than dissimilar. But it's a fair question. I think these larger studies that we've seen more recently, the replication and extension studies, you can feel more confident in because they're just larger.
Could one infer from some of those initial findings that it might suggest that students kind of break two ways with telepractice, that some don't seem to perform quite as well with it versus traditional therapy, versus others who tend to perform a little better with it and respond to that modality better? Could you infer that from those initial findings?
You could, and I think that's obvious, always going to be a question in the back of your mind. As we're seeing these bigger studies with thousands of kids and hundreds of remote kids, we're not seeing that anymore. So it really does matter that you replicate things and you do it with larger, diverse groups.
Okay. And are your findings, did your initial and early findings vary much? I guess you were in 2008. Did they vary much from the more recent studies of Rudolph or Wales or Kufal or Musashi or some of these others?
We were very encouraged by the recent studies. They really were confirming that that you can expect similar percentages.
Okay.
The larger numbers helps to see the pattern more correctly. There's always that danger with these small studies, right?
But it seems to me that there was a lot of confirmation that even though you did have small sample sizes, at the very least, the findings were somewhat indicative of what was going on with the teletherapy.
And that's how we argued it statistically. It's easier to not find a difference. So when you're finding a difference, even with a small number, that usually should be encouraging that students did do better. They responded in the therapy.
And a follow-up question to this is, in your research, what have you learned about different student populations? Which ones tend to be the most receptive to telepractice? Which ones tend to be the least receptive? And is this a function of things like age or gender or type of disorder? How does that break? Are you finding anything within these studies that would show that certain populations respond better? And it might even be they're responding to specific modalities, whether it's a hybrid or something else.
So you're probably not going to like this answer. And if you talk to 3 or 4 other people, you might get a completely different answer. But our clinical experience has been that most students can participate in telehealth and that they can be successful in telehealth. We rarely exclude a student. We often give them a trial first and give them a chance, and we let them tell us if it's going to work or not for them, or we'll observe it in their behaviors. But right now, we're not finding that. Now, here's the exception. Children with complex communication impairment and sensory impairment, we can work with students with augmentative and alternative devices, especially if they have devices that allow us to project their configurations on the computer. But if you have a child with hearing loss and or vision loss and physical challenges with accessing technology, then it's hard. It's going to be hard for those kids. We might be able to support with some technology, but there really are children who would benefit better from in person.
What are you finding with kids on the spectrum? How are they doing with, how are they showing up in these recent studies?
There's some nice research. Michelle Boivet is doing some nice research in this area. And we're hearing from the students themselves that some of them prefer telehealth because it's easier for them. Viewing a person on the screen is easier for them than being in person talking. And they can do well, they can do okay in either condition, but it's a preference for them to work through telehealth.
Interesting.
Now, those are children who have the ability to express themselves and participate in this session. Children who have a severe level of autism and are not maybe functionally communicating, I do not have a lot of data on those students. I don't know.
Okay, and we're fast approaching the time. We've got 2 more questions.
Okay.
Thank you for indulging us in answering these. But Linda Lafiadis, I hope I didn't slaughter that, asked, are you doing these 5-minute sessions with telehealth?
Yes, the Vicki Pullen study, she did 6-minute sessions. They didn't do it in 5. So yeah, and very successfully. They are committed to that rapid artic delivery.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then our final question, and this will take us to our conclusion, from Wendy Jorgensen. Is there research on working on social skills virtually versus in person?
Not as much as there should be. That could be your dissertation topic. So we are thinking about RTI with that. And it can be challenging because you're trying to do group work with that, and you're trying to make it be as naturalistic as it can be. So that's a research area we need more research on, especially with telehealth, right? Yeah, sure. That's a great question.
So yeah, we're at time, Susan. We want to thank you for joining us and giving this wonderful presentation. It's very clear to me that we need to have you come back. So I hope this was an enjoyable experience for you.
Well, it was. Thank you.